Hello, and welcome to the National Library of Norway and this special event dedicated to Norwegian folk music and computational analysis. My name is Ingrid Romarheim Haugen, and I'm head of the music section here in the National Library. This is the second event co-organized by the RITMO Center at the University of Oslo and the National Library of Norway connected to the MIRAGE project. The last event was a two-day symposium which took place in June 2021 on Zoom. Today, I'm delighted to welcome you to a physical event here in the National Library. And I would also like to welcome those of you that follow the event on stream. MIRAGE is a 4-year project funded by the Research Council of Norway, and it's now in its final year. One aim of the MIRAGE project is to conceive new technologies allowing to better access, understand, and appreciate Norwegian folk music. And today, we will be presented to a new version of an online folk music catalogue based on a selection from the National Library's folk music sound collection, as well as quite new software for segmentation of field recordings of folk music and for transcription of Hardanger fiddle tunes. For us in the National Library, this might open up for new ways of working with our ever-increasing digital collections of Norwegian folk music, and might present new possibilities for structuring large sound collections and make them accessible for new user groups. I would like to thank the local organizers at the RITMO Center and the National Library, especially Olivier, Lartillot, for putting together this very interesting program. I would also like to thank Hans-Hinrich Thedens, who represents the National Library in the MIRAGE project, as well as Terje Bjørkheim, research librarian here at the National Library, and Marit Furunes, research advisor at the University of Oslo, for taking care of the practical details connected to this event. I'm also delighted to welcome all the speakers and contributors to today's program. I am very much looking forward to following the presentations and performances during the next few hours. And by that, I leave the stage to Alexander Refsum Jensenius, leader of the RITMO Center at the University of Oslo. Thank you.
So my name is Alexander Jensenius. I'm director of RITMO Center for Interdisciplinary Studies of Rhythm, Time and Motion at the University of Oslo. And for those of you that know our center, this is a collaboration between the Department of Musicology, Psychology and Informatics. And I think the interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary nature of our center is also very well represented in the MIRAGE project, where the idea is also then to combine various types of informatics perspectives, music information retrieval, with different types of musicology, and in this context with on Norwegian folk music. So again, I would also like to thank Olivier for putting all of this together, and also it's very nice to be here in person again after some Zoom editions in the past, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing the bridging over between the different disciplines that will get represented today, and particularly also that we get some real music being played today. That will be fantastic. So also from RITMO's side, welcome to the seminar, and over to Olivier.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Welcome to this symposium about the MIRAGE project. So first, a bit of overview of today. So we will present this new Norwegian collection of folk music, new online version. We will have an introduction of a discussion about Hardanger fiddle music. We are very honored to have Olav Luksengård Mjelva here to give some little concert and presentation about this wonderful music. We will speak about the problem of transcription of Hardanger fiddle music and analysis, and focusing in particular on the problem of rhythm in Hardanger fiddle music. And so we will discuss about music analysis, visualization, and browsing into the music catalogue. And so particularly the question of how to use computer technologies to go further into these problems of analysis of music. So first of all, why using computer to analyze, visualize music? So a presentation of the MIRAGE project. So first, it's all about music. So let's listen to some wonderful music. So I guess you all agree about the wonders of music, the richness, the huge impact that music can have on the aesthetic and emotional experience. But what I would like to emphasize here is the complexity of music by itself, how difficult it is to fully apprehend and appreciate the richness and the huge diversity of music. And so to better discuss about that, we can think about the fact that actually music is multimodal. So you have the experience of the musicians themselves interacting with their instruments and with the music score, if the music is written. If it's oral music, oral tradition, they don't need a score to play the music. Then you have the dancing aspect. So for a lot of music, especially this one also, dancing is an important aspect, contribution of the music experience. Then for the audience, it's about watching, appreciating, watching and listening to the performances. And in today's modern world, one very common way to appreciate music is also through audio recordings. So now when we think about all this complexity of music, the richness of music, we could think of that, okay, we have the score that can show the music in details, but still, despite what can be shown in the score, there is so many interesting information that is hidden behind that we need to extract to better apprehend all this richness. And when we speak about audio recordings or listening to music, it's even more complex, challenging, because it's just sound, it's invisible, and how to be able to reconstruct all this information that we could appreciate from the music. So, and then also when you consider a big catalog of audio recordings, it gets even more complex, because you have all these audio recordings which could have some kind of metadata, some titles, artists, and so on, genres. But then how to appreciate all the richness of that is challenging. So then, of course, you have music study that can help to better understand music and appreciate music through many ways. So collecting music, such as a collection of Norwegian folk music. Then building taxonomies. This is just a joke. this image, but more seriously trying to build different type of decomposition of styles into genres and so on. Then transcription into score is an important aspect of music analysis. Then from score or from recordings, getting more complex information about the structure, the pattern, the different aspects related to the music and to aspects related to the theory of music. Then music pedagogy is also an important part of that. And then higher, more complex aspect is to understand the cognitive processes and perceptual processes, how humans are able to appreciate music through which brain processes and so on, and how emotion can rise from music appreciation, and then music therapy, how to deal with psychological problems using music help. So then the next question could be that now for the public, how could this music study be of interest for the public? And one problem that could be considered is that these music studies, there could be a risk of being very technical, somewhat arcane, sometimes inaccessible. So how to make this accessible for the public? There have been a development of a longer large type of activities for that, such as notes in concert program explaining each piece of music so that listeners could appreciate the subtlety of the richness of each piece, listening guides, and then music pedagogy, and through music therapy is also a way to reach to the public, to make the public more and more appreciating the music aspects. So there are these great developments. But then the idea is, could we do more to make the music? So, for instance, Norwegian folk music more and more accessible to the general public, so that they could really appreciate that richness, which might be sometimes a bit difficult to access if you don't know about the principles of that music. So what could we do? And that's why we can try to think about computational research as a way to answer this question. But if we go back to music study, we can also think of some possible problems, challenges, that when you have to collect music, transcribe music, perform music analysis is very difficult and time-consuming. It's in a way reductionist in the sense that you have to sometimes restrict to some aspect of the music, that you can't cover everything because you have to do that manually, especially. So you have to accept to have a limited scope of the study, generally. There is a risk of, there is an implicit subjectivity that sometimes is not completely made explicit, so that you can have some kind of biased approach of particular music aspects. And the analysis of performances is particularly difficult if you have a lot of different performances and you want to analyze the richness of each different performance without automating the method. It could be very challenging. That's where, using computer, we could try to think of some solution to these problems, of how to address those challenges. So through a kind of automation, if we are able to do that, to automate some aspect of music analysis, then if it works, it can enable to make some kind of intensive analysis, meaning that you can go really into detail very systematically for each piece of music, for instance, but then also have a very extensive analysis of very large collections. And then you might need to, the computer might constrain you to try to formalize and to make much more objective some type of subjectivity as part of the music analysis. So that can enable to try to make better understand the process and avoid any bias, for instance. And it could allow also through this automation analysis of performances. But of course, this is if we are able to make computational models that will perform music analysis at least as that could not replace, of course, musicologists, because it would be a different approach, but that could produce some kind of aspect that is at least of some relevance in a musicological point of view. This is already very challenging to perform this kind of computational program that will be able to be a bit relevant musicologically speaking. But once you get to the stage, we could hope to, through automation, to offer big help for musicology. So again, computational help through automation of music analysis. So as I said, intensive to transcend in a way the reductionist approaches, sometimes of music analysis by default, by necessity. Extensive in the sense of analyzing large collections, and then formalization, objective subjectivity, and analysis of performance. And another focus of importance, something that I was finding very important, is the fact that with computer we can visualize music, offer dynamic representations of the music, for instance, sync to the music being played, and offer interactive representations and way to browse into the music, into a piece of music, or into a catalogue. So that's where the MIRAGE project a bit is oriented towards, around those aims. So again, it's about, for the first part, trying to improve computers' capability to listen and to understand music. Facilitates music understanding and appreciation, both for musicologists, for musicians, and for the public. And so to make music more accessible and engaging. So I won't go into details about what we have been doing in the MIRAGE project. Of course, one important focus is what we will present today, but I can present some aspect related to the music visualization, the last part. So we have done a bit of several projects. So one was to make some kind of visualization of music videos to show aspects related to basic audio features. So this is and you see that we made colors related to the pitch of the voice and to the bass. In yellow, it's the bass, that's what we say. So that's very low level of music analysis. Then we also collaborated with Bjorn Charles Ryer for a music lab project about synesthesia. So Bjorn is synesthete, so he visualizes internally colors and forms, image related to the sound. And so we try to reproduce kind of real time, but using his strategies. And so, for instance, here, trying to generate the colors based on his understanding of the relation between chords and colors. And the more complex here is trying to model some more complex aspect of his visualization when it's about timbre. So this was about like low level of music, of sound, we could say. Then a more challenging project was to visualize something quite high level this time, because it's about Bach, Art of Fugue, the last contrapunctus, and a project with a music lab at Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, we had a concert with the Danish String Quartet, and so make a visualization that was shown on the left during the concert of the Art of Fugue. We try to show the repetition of the main theme of the Bach fugue. You have the first repetition of the first occurrence of the subject by the cello. And then when the alto viola appears, appears on the left, so that you have a kind of superposition of the different motifs. So to try to explain about the fact that you have this kind of repetition of the same theme that you can follow vertically. And then it gets more complex because we also try to show the different developments of the contrast subject, where Bach is actually using a lot of different pieces from the contrast subject and repeats them in many various ways. Just to finish here, that at some point we can also show we have the second subject in a different colors. Then we have the first and the second subject, and then the third subject, and at the end it's just like the final with the three together. So kind of a bit more challenging to show something complex about the music. We also try to show a bit of the internal sound of the vibrato of each musician. So we have both this low level and the high level. And so that was also the interest of this type of visualization. Another project we worked before the MIRAGE project, which was the first collaboration we had with the National Library, that was led by Alexander Jensenius. It was called Sound Tracer, and to understand how the use of sound gesture could help for a tool to browse into the catalogue of folk music. And so that was very challenging because we already have a lot of questions that now we are trying to deal with the current project. How to deal with all this catalogue of folk music, how to segment into different tunes, and the question of how to analyze those tunes to find interesting features. And finally, how to have some kind of query. You can query with gesture and get some similar pieces of music. So basically what we are doing now in the MIRAGE project is kind of core research that could then be used for these high-level aspects. And I will go back also to this at the end of this day. So that was about the MIRAGE project. And so today, we will cover the aspect related to Norwegian folk music. Today, it's a bit about particular application of all these questions to Norwegian folk music, about automating of music analysis and visualization of music. So if no particular question, we can switch to the next presentation. Thank you. So Hans-Hinrich Thedens, who is research librarian here at the National Library, with whom I have been collaborating quite intensively for the MIRAGE project and also for the Sound Tracer project. So you will present the Norwegian collection of folk music that we will then show how we try to segment and to create an online collection. So Hans-Hinrich.
Yes, I'm in charge of the sound archive of folk music recordings here at the National Library. And what we've done is to provide a large number of recordings for the MIRAGE project to analyze, and also the Sound Tracer project before. As you may know, or as you may learn during the day, Norway has a very, very lively, very strong folk music scene. Folk music is alive and well. It's not a thing of the past. And we have several study programs in higher education where people can study folk music as a specialty. And some of these students come and visit here. And every year I ask them to begin with, so why would we have a folk music archive?
And they always say, yeah, well, of course, to make the old recordings accessible, to strengthen the tradition so that the young musicians can have several sources to take care of the national heritage and to creatively work on music. And I said, yes, this is all true, but this archive was started for entirely different reasons. It was founded in 1951 by Olav Luksengård under the title Norwegian Folk Music Institute, funded by the Research Council, and situated in a part of town, in a flat in a part of town that now is very hip, but wasn't then, Grünerløkka. And it was dedicated to research in sound. And the reason for that was that Norwegian folk music was discovered in the 1800s in the period of national romanticism and collected, and already the first collectors had noted that this music is different from what we learn at school. Why is that? And then a number of scholars had debated and had put forth theories about why the intonation was different, why the rhythms were unusual, and they had all analyzed the collections they themselves had put together or from the 1800s. So it was the analysis was done on the grounds of written notation. And in the 1950s, Gervin said this is not valid anymore. We have to use modern scientific methods to measure sound. He was inspired by American and German scholars like Milton Medtfessel, who had published things already in the 1920s. So, and by that time, reel-to-reel tape recorders were available on the consumer market. And in addition to that, they collaborated with the physics department at the university and developed, took into use sonographs, and then they developed one of the first melody writers for monophonic music. But they needed research material to analyze, and so they started the archive. They started a sound collection, and at first they invited known performers to the university, and I always imagine some rural person singing the repertoire they learned in their youth, and then a big window and a technician in a white lab coat on the other side, which is almost comical today, but that was the idea of objective research then. Right. After that, they started the first field trips. They went to near the Swedish border, the valley of Österdalen and town of Trysil, and recorded, among other things, cattle calls. And later they went to the district of Valdres. And then throughout the years, they hired more external people who knew the local people and knew something about music, and gave them a reel-to-reel tape recorder and had them send the recordings to Oslo. Out of this, well, they were taking the scientific part of this very seriously, so the number of publications that came out of this work is not exactly huge. There was one article by Gervin, Photography as an Aid in Folk Music Research, from 1953. Then his assistant Carl Dahlbach published New Methods in Vocal Folk Music Research, and both of these in English, because it was really aimed at the larger research community. And then Ola Kailedang published his, I think it was his master's thesis, and published as a book later, Sång, Syngemåte, Stämmekarakter, which focused on a limited number of recordings of singing. So it's song, ways of singing, and type of voice. So this is basically why we have an affinity to the methodology of the MIRAGE project. We've thought, or our predecessors have thought that way before. And I'll continue a little bit with the history of the archive. Even that is known to have put many of these visiting folk music students to sleep. But I think it's important to point out that the archive has changed direction several times. When Gurvin retired, and then the then engineer Ola Kailedang was appointed professor in Trondheim, it was decided that the collection should be at the University of Oslo, and the new staff was Sven Nyhus. He was playing in the Oslo Symphony, but he was really a first-class traditional fiddle player from the town of Røros. And the second employee was Reidar Sevåg, who was a historian and who had worked at the folk museum out on the peninsula of Bygdøy, and had published on folk music instruments, and he was in charge of the collections out there. So, when that took place, there were already 1,350 reiterated tapes, and almost 2,500 recording sessions had been conducted. And in the years to follow, I've set some kind of cut-off date by 1975, when this really changed character a bit. There were 834 new recording sessions, and those were partly carried out by young people, students who got interested in folk music and went to the university and became interested in their own district's folk music. Because there was this organized, this year we celebrate 100 years of the National Association of Fiddle Players. And this organization conducted formal contests, and there were several styles of fiddle playing that absolutely dominated those contests. In the 1970s, which were a special time in Norway, kind of like the 60s and other countries, there was this interest in the rural, in the local. Students got interested in the music. The political left got interested in folk music. And students who went to the Musicology Institute, really specialized in folk music, and this was something new. And they then wrote quite a few master's theses or hovedfag theses about local traditions that were kind of outside the official folk music world. So a lot of music got rediscovered in the 1970s. As I wrote here, lesser districts were discovered, and there was a discussion about the definition of folk music, what could be included, what should not be included. So more and more instruments were kind of allowed in, at least in the academic definition. And then we have an important development that from circa around 1980, many of local fiddlers clubs wanted to follow up and kind of reconstruct or rebuild the local music. And then they learned that in the 1950s and 60s, people had been there with tape recorders. And where did these recordings get to? And then they found out that, oh yeah, there were not only the National Broadcasting Corporation had made recordings, but also the university or the Folk Music Institute. And local archives were started, and many of these recordings were sent back to where they came from. And there they were used to kindle interest for the local music and rejuvenate what was left of the tradition. My clock is kind of hiding. The next phase for us at the archive was that we tried to make things more accessible. And first for ourselves by developing our own computer software as a catalog, developed in-house and tailor-made for field recordings. We call this fiol, which is a word that was a title that was chosen because both Swedish archives and Norwegian archives were taking part in this project, because fiol in Norwegian is a flower and in Swedish it's fiddle, so that should work. And from there on, we've kind of continued all the above activities. Since the year 2000, we've started collecting digital video. Since 2002, we've published audio recordings on CDs, which you can buy out here in the gift shop. And all these years, we also took a little bit of part in teaching at the university, but in 2014, the archive was transferred here to the National Library. And we're still doing field work, we're still collecting, cataloging, doing research, and try to disseminate in different ways. And the collecting also takes on different shapes. I wrote here that since 2015, the National Folk Music Stage here in town, Riksscenen, we have an agreement that they send us audio recordings of a number of the concerts they have. Yes, and then I want to jump back to the very first time of the Folk Music Institute, because in parallel to all the technology and all the modern analysis, there was a different project going on, which also took a lot of work and attention and funding. And this was the Hardanger. I've called it the Fiddle Music Series because it has been continued as the Slottet for vanlig fele, because Norway is divided in two as to which is the dominating folk music dance instrument. In the southwest, we have the Hardanger fiddle, the exotic one, and in the rest of the country, we have the standard violin, like most other places in Europe. Of course, the special comes first. So between 1953 and 81, 7 volumes of transcriptions were published. First as a edition of the collections of 3 prominent fiddle players who also could write music, which was not very common among fiddle players. Arne Bjørndal, Truls Erpen, and Eivind Goven. And I think the initiator was Ole Mørk Sandvik. The official editor was Olaf Gurvin. But the main part of the work of editing these tunes was done by Eivind Goven, a well-known composer. Later volumes were increasingly transcribed from audio recordings. And then, after the first generation was gone, I think Goven was the last one to pass on in 1977. The work was not finished, so a new editorial board finished the last 2 volumes, and kind of the main effort there was to really check with the fiddle players themselves which tunes were still missing in the first 5 volumes, and then in a very condensed 2 more volumes, the picture was tried to complete the picture there. And then from 1981 we had the continuation for the standard violin. The first volumes edited by Reidar Sevåg and Olav Sæther, the last 3 by Olav Sæther, and the last are not the last because this work is not finished. But why is this important for the MIRAGE project? Because we have quite a number of tunes where we have traditional transcriptions done after the recordings we still have. So we can use this to compare with what the computer can come up with. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Explain about the segmentation.
Yeah.
So. Thank you, Hans-Hinrich. Now it's about the segmentation of this collection into tunes. So maybe Hans-Hinrich, you could explain about the context of this program, about this collection of tunes, and then I can.
Yeah, I said we supplied the project with a corpus of material, but we also supplied some tasks and research questions. And in the current phase, of course, we're trying to make our recordings as accessible as possible. The database we have is actually older than the internet, which causes a number of problems, but our Swedish colleague Per Gudmundsson has developed an online version of the catalog called WebFuel. And WebFuel has the option of playing sound online. And this is what we want to make possible for all the recordings that have passed on into the public domain. But the problem is a purely technical one, that we have digitized files of these recordings of 1 or 2 hours length, but WebFuel needs exact time codes for every single cut, every single melody, in order to be able to play it online. So I asked Olivier, can't you come up with a tool that would automatically find start and end of all these tunes so that we don't have to do this by hand or by ear or whatever you call it. And so that has been the little task that we have been addressing here.
Thank you. And also, it's not only to be able to play in the web view, but also to extract all those recordings of individual tunes, so that then we can have this catalog of individual tunes. So, as part of the collection, there is already a metadata that was available, that was incorporated into the fuel system, where for each tune you have the title, the genre, the region, instrument, performer, date. There is, for some of them, maybe a percentage. Do you know which percentage there is an approximate location in the recordings?
I've always guessed 30%.
30%. But for the rest, there is no indication of the location of each tune in each recording. So to do that, first, there is some state-of-the-art that we have been considering. And actually, Maria Marolt, who gave a talk here for the first seminar of the Sound Tracer project, developed a software called Cephire, segmentation of field recording. That's the name of the software, which automatically tries to detect this type of instruments. It's nice, but it was not enough for our needs. It could segment sometimes when it's clear separation between type of instruments. But in our case, for instance, when you have singing and then a speech and then a singing, that was not working that well. So we had to develop our own solution. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. First, of course, we don't need to design everything by ourselves. If we find some technological solutions, why not using them? So it turns out that right now, in the state of the art, already in your phone, in your computer, you already have this system that can do sound classification. And that can classify a lot of different types of sounds, including music. You have here, this is for instance in the Apple platform, you have for music different instruments, hi-hat, keyboard, musical, and so on. But it's very useful. But it will provide a score for each different type of sound for successive excerpt of music of, let's say, 1.5 seconds. So for each, you have a score for each type of class. But then we really need to have very clear cuts into a succession of segments. So I designed this software, where first we run this tool that I mentioned, for instance, this sound classification software. We get the score for each successive moment in the music. So here we have an excerpt starting from, I don't have the pointer here, but from 300 seconds. So yeah, I can see well. So we have an excerpt of the tape. That this is voice. Then we have a speech here. And then for the next part here, we have fiddle playing. And we see the score related to different classes of sound. So yellow is speech, red is singing, purple is music, and blue is fiddle, bowing in general. So there are two types of blue, two types of bowing. And because, for instance, in this example, the singing is, I will show the video of the demo after that. The singing is kind of, it's not a bel canto singing, as we can imagine. For those type of classification tool, it doesn't recognize that very clearly as singing. Sometimes it will consider that as a speech. That's why the singing, which was red, is quite low, and you have a lot of speech. So it's very difficult here to be able to decide that based on this, we can think that this segment is actually a song. So I try to make a system that based on those quite very partial information, we can still do this kind of segmentation. So this is what you got after. And actually, I didn't notice right now, but there was actually also a speech at that point. So that means that there was a song that was finished at the point of the speech, then the speech introducing the next song, and then another song, then a little speech, and the fiddle. And so the system is able to show the beginning of each song with of each tune with a red vertical line, but actually we also distinguish between the beginning of the speech, introductory speech, and then the actual music shown with the green vertical line. And so to do that, it's a model that will try to design the different states that you can meet when trying to understand the different parts in the music. So, for instance, let's say you start with, you don't know exactly in which state you are, but if you have a very high score in speech, for instance, you can start with a speech state, and then you have this kind of state where it's more fuzzy, where you are not sure anymore if you are in speech or in bowing or in singing. And based on this kind of rule, looking at the thresholds of the probability score, we switch between these different states. So meaning that initially to be able to distinguish about speech, you need to have a score of speech that is higher than 85%. So in that case, then you are sure that it is about speech. But then if the singing, if there is actually some kind of singing in that segment, even if it's quite low, then we start to infer that maybe it's more about singing. So we are very, we encourage the state singing, even if the score is quite low, because as I mentioned, singing is often rated as low, and so on and so forth. And then the next step is to be able to, from the metadata of all the songs and the indication of approximate position of each song in seconds for those songs that are indicated in with the temporal position, we try to then locate them into those different segments. So, for instance, I can show an example here. First, when we load the tape, we can see the evolution of energy over time in gray, to begin with. Then we can play that tape. We can zoom and select a part to play.
Dagen viker og går bort, sungen av Harald Hope. Dagen viker og går bort, luften bliver tykk og sort. Harald Hope. Jeg ser deg o Guds lam og stå på Sion.
So here, for instance, end of singing, then some silence, and then some speech and some fiddle. Then we run this sound classification system that we produce a score for each class, for each successive instant in the music. We get those curves that I mentioned, and automatically we also have this segmentation based on the successive states.
O min søte himmelskatt.
So, and we can play different parts, so the end of the singing, the speech, And then the fiddle. Yes, then we can automatically retrieve the name of each song by looking at retrieving from the fuel database. So now you see the name of each song at the top, at the right of each tune. Okay. I think we get the idea. This is how one tape could look like at the end with all those successive tunes. And then it could get more tricky when, in the case of a tune where you don't have the temporal information that was pre-recorded into the metadata. So I can show how we do in this case. We try to make it as easy as possible to still associate each tune with each the title or metadata. So here we load another file. Okay. And then when we ask to retrieve a song, we see that actually it indicates that all the tunes that were listed are not actually, there is no temporal information for those. So in such case, then you have to, you can browse into those tunes and manually associate those to each segment. So hopefully, thankfully, I think usually the order is kind of correct for each tape. So you can use that order for association.
Vi skal høre førespillet til Christian Øvreål sier.
And so, yes, you can switch along the different tune names and select the one that is correct for the tune and associate to the given segment. So this AudioSegmentor software has been used by the research assistant that was working on the project. He found it quite useful, especially for distinction between fiddle, segmentation of fiddle parts. When it's about singing, it's more difficult because sometimes the segmentation is not correct. So there is possibility of, I think I didn't show, but we try to make ways to correct errors, but still not lose the metadata that is associated to each segment. So if you delete one segmentation, you can still retrieve the title that was associated to the segment that was next to that one. So it's available. It will be available on the MIRAGE website, and you can export as a database file. And as a set of audio files, so structure along the different instrument types. So we did that so that we can then use that to put this kind of structuration of the files into the catalog, the online catalog that we have built. So we have made this new catalog here of Norwegian collection of folk music. Sorry, I'm not used to that. So right now we have been using this open science framework, OSF, hosting service to host our version of the electronic version of the Norwegian Folk Music Archive. But we plan to transit then to other server. But so you can see the different tunes organized along the different type of instrumentation. So we have the Hardanger fiddle here. Do they have yeah, and so on.
En buttelbrannvin kan vera moro for kons.
What was happening there?
I think you just found a mistake.
What? We just made big changes just before the day, and then I just broke everything, I think. So let's prepare the finish clearly this. Quietly this data set, and then you will be able to, because the metadata is correct. This one is better. Okay, you see, you get the idea. Yes, so right now we have this first version in Open Science Framework, but we plan to transfer to another hosting service such as Dataverse NO. But if you check out in the MIRAGE website, we will inform when we will have the new version. Any questions so far about this? Yes, we have a few questions.
Is it on? Yeah, it is. Okay. So, as I understand, the AudioSegmentor, you segment different tunes according to the speech that's in between, right?
Yeah.
The way you extract different tunes is like you detect if there's speech in between, and you basically just segment like after the speech, a new tune starts, right?
Yes.
What I'm wondering is, in these field recordings, is there instances in which different tunes are played in sequence, so there's no speech in between, and how would you even adapt the software to account for that?
Yes, so right now I think because we have, it happens that we have yeah.
I think so far we're lucky that these recordings are from the first period, and there was a standard rule of first you say a name, then you say the tune, and then you play the tune. Mm-hmm. So mostly this works well. When we come to later recordings, which are not yet in the public domain, people were just not as strict about that, and then it gets to be problematic. And the other issue is, of course, how do you tell, in this case, one fiddle tune from the next? There's usually a longer break, that may be easy, but how do you tell one song from the next and make sure that it's not just another new verse?
Yeah.
Yes, so we were trying to experiment about using silence as a way to do the segmentation. But right now, because we didn't have the need, we didn't make it directly in the implementation. But that's the idea also, that because we will progressively go to a higher level of music analysis of all those different type of music, we hope to have a kind of integration where using those high-level description that will be used to have better segmentation into successive tunes based on different harmonic contents, melodic content. But of course, that's very ambitious. So yeah, we start with very simple to begin with.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. This looks very, very impressive. I have two questions, one more technical and one more kind of library-oriented. And the more technical one, I wonder about the segmentation values here. I guess these have been developed with some trial and error type of approach, but I guess there is also some kind of manual corrections, and how do you deal with kind of the handling that also as the database develops now, how to kind of incorporate that. And that can links me to my second question is, here we export the segments as far as I understand, but how will you handle kind of the also the metadata in relation to this? What will be the master in the end of this work that will be preserved?
So in the first case, I tried to find some kind of solution that seemed to work well, but it's true that we might need to. We were thinking also of using deep learning, the machine learning for that, but the problem is that we will need a lot of training data. That's why we found this type of. Initially, this was supposed to be like a first step to get some kind of quick first annotation, then that we use for learning processes as a learning data for machine learning, and so that later we will have a more higher advanced, more adapted to other type of configurations. But this was a kind of fast approach that was kind of working well in our case. But yeah, for the second question, so it's because we have the metadata, the fuel as a kind of format, CSV file or something. We can then add this new timing data, precise start and end of segments to that metadata, to that fuel. But is there anything to consider in particular? Do you have any answer for the second question from Alexander?
Well, you can say that in the context of the National Library, this is just a temporal solution. But we hope to be able to use these new metadata that we generate here when we migrate the whole system into the larger new audio database for audiovisual materials for the National Library. This is kind of the next step. We're getting done as much as we can, as soon as we can.
If we have a bit of time, and if you are interested, I could talk a bit more about the general method and epistemology of underlying the MIRAGE project, if you are interested. Let me. There it is. Because, so we will talk later this afternoon about the distinction between two kind of approaches. One based on machine learning, where you train a kind of black box. You give data, training data to automate the process. And the other method that, for instance, was used for this segmentation problem, where I tried to build some kind of set of rules based on heuristics manually. In that case, it was working, but of course, for a more general case, as we will see, for instance, for not transcription, it's better to use machine learning. But later in the afternoon, for rhythm detection, rhythm analysis, I will also emphasize back the use of explicit models. So then the other aspect is we have the audio recordings, we have a score, how to perform music analysis, in which dimension to take into consideration. So from audio, you have especially the dynamics, the timbres, and we can make some kind of approximation of music analysis. So I developed a platform, a toolbox for music information retrieval, so computational music analysis in MATLAB that has been used quite extensively, and where you can have a lot of aspects of the music along low levels, such as low-level descriptions such as spectrogram, dynamics, timbre, attack, brightness, spectral shape, roughness. Then detection of notes, attempt of detection of notes and pitch tracking, and a higher level tonality, tempo, and some aspect related to structure. But of course, it's a bit more. It gets more difficult when getting to high-level description, and that is it's difficult to obtain results that will correspond to what musicologists might expect. For instance, concerning tonal analysis, and for instance, for tempo, we have been working extensively on detecting pulsation in music and tracking tempo over time, and developing methods where we compute periodicities over time. And the problem is that this type of approach, based on audio, might offer some difficulties sometimes. For instance, for this particular problem of detecting succession of periodicities over time, if you just look at the highest periodicity instant after instant, because in the music you can have pulsation, a very fast pulsation at some point on eighth notes and then on quarter notes and so on. This is not the best way to track tempo. So we were trying then to be able to track each different symmetrical layer separately. But just to mention that it gets very interesting description from the audio. We can try to get some estimation of the tempo over time. I will not go into the details about those type of descriptions here, but the idea is that still in such consideration, sometimes it makes it's getting more make more sense to go back to the score transcription, and from the transcription try to infer the succession of beats from the score to infer the tempo. So that's why you can analyze either from audio recordings or from written music. And so from written music, there is a lot of possible methods that are available in the state of the art. Statistics, set theory, search, query retrieval, metrical analysis, harmonic analysis, voicing. I will go a bit of details on that this afternoon. And so the thing is that the interest that we can emphasize here is that when you start from audio and try to perform some automated transcription, so that we will look at this afternoon, then we have a kind of combination of both. We have the symbolic and we have the audio. And so we have the detail of the audio. We also can relate each symbols, each note, and so on to the particular timing information, so that we can try to get the most of both worlds in a way. And so we will see that this afternoon. But basically, the idea and one principle of the MIRAGE project is to try to go over this distinction between analysis just from audio and analysis just from the score, but try to do transcription and developing. This I will not go into detail, but I'm trying to build a kind of models for analysis of music, where I try to consider the different aspects of music analysis. For the notes, for instance, you have detection of motifs, metrical analysis for the notes based on repetition of patterns. We will see actually this later today when I will explain about rhythm analysis from Hardanger fiddle. Mode analysis, grouping, segmentation, reduction. The idea is to try to study the combination between all those different modules related to music analysis. So that's a kind of underlying aspect, research aspect related to the MIRAGE project that I wanted to emphasize also here. Sorry for these technical scientific considerations. I hope you can follow, but so there are still some time for questions before the break, if you have any question. So this afternoon we will go more into detail into this program of first transcription. So first with a very nice introduction of Hardanger fiddle music, of the program of rhythm in Hardanger fiddle music, and then how to model the aspects of first detection of notes. Here we will use more like deep learning, and then how to then infer the beats from Hardanger fiddle music, and the consideration of the higher level aspects of music analysis. So, yeah, Mats?
Yeah, I just want to mention the multi-level tempo analysis seems promising in light of some of the features of the Hardanger fiddle repertoire, where if you look at the bar level or the beat level, the tempo seems inconsistent in a way, while I would argue that it's actually in many cases consistent, because there is some level of rhythmic density that remains constant while beats are stretched or rhythmically reshaped in various ways. And I guess that, I don't know, but it would be interesting to explore further in the future whether some form of multi-level analysis could capture the consistency, or in some cases possibly inconsistency in tempo, without looking at the bar length or the beat distribution, which might be misleading. Yeah.
Yes, very interesting. There might be some elements of answer this afternoon when I will show this attempt of modeling of beat tracking from Hardanger fiddle music. We can check at that point if that these questions is addressed or not.
Yes.
So then thank you for your participation for this morning. There is a break with should be lunch offered here. I don't know where, maybe outside. So, bon appétit. So we start again at 12. So we start with an introduction of Hardanger fiddle music. It's a great honor to have with us Olav Luksengård Mjelva. Do I need to introduce you, Olav, who is extremely famous and he got a prestigious Spellemann Prisen, the Norwegian equivalent of Grammy Award for several times, and Norway's Folk Musician of the Year, and so on. And he also a great studio musician. And the combination of both was very helpful for the project, I will mention later. But so it's very fantastic to have you here to present us a bit about Hardanger fiddle music. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. And it's been very interesting to be a part of the project. Interesting and a bit frustrating at times. I think we will talk about that later, right? Not the frustration, but my part of the project. But yeah, so this is the Hardanger fiddle. This will be a short introduction to the instrument and the music, a little bit of the music. So short about the history. So the first known Hardanger fiddle we know about is from 1651, and in Norwegian it's called Hardingfjellet, in English Hardanger fiddle, and it's of course because the first known fiddle is from the region of Hardanger, by the beautiful Hardanger fjord. Jåstadfjella is the first fiddle we know, and it's at a museum in Bergen. And I haven't played it, but I've held it like this. And it's very light and much smaller than this modern model. So the first Hardanger fiddles had a more round body and usually just 2 sympathetic strings. And that's the main difference from the violin is the sympathetic strings. It's a little bit hard to see, but under the fingerboard there are 5 sympathetic strings. And on top there are 4 melody strings. So that's the main difference from the violin. And then the bridge is quite flat, so you can play several strings at the same time. And in a lot of the music you play at least at 2 strings most of the time. Yeah, so I'm going to play a little bit. I think before I go into detail about talking about the music, I will play Prelude. We heard like 1 second of it in Olivier's presentation earlier. It was a fiddler from Hallingdal, the valley of Hallingdal, Christian Øvrevoldseie. And a lot of fiddlers have their own preludes that they played in the beginning of a dance session, for example, or just to check that the fiddle was ready to go. So I'll play the one that we heard a couple of seconds of earlier. Yeah, and just short about the tuning. It's usually tuned higher than the violin, so this one is now tuned a third higher, so it's C, F, C, G. And then this is the most common tuning. It's like a violin tuning, but with you tune the bass string a whole step up. And then the sympathetic strings are tuned usually in a major chord, like. And tuning is a big part of my life. There are at least 25 different tunings used in the Hardanger fiddle regions altogether. In Hallingdal, where I play music from, it's 6 or 7 different tunings. That's enough. So a little prelude. then I'm ready to play some dance music because most of the repertoire is dance music, like 99.5% maybe. There are some ceremonial tunes like wedding marches and stuff like that, and some listening tunes that are just for listening, but most of it is dance music. And the most common dance, I would say, is called springar, which is a couple dance. And then we have gangar and halling. Gangar is also a couple dance, and halling is a solo dance. Very acrobatical, and I would never try it. But over to, the springar is maybe the most interesting music for this project, and it was also what I recorded most of, because it's compared to like normal fiddle tunes, it's quite more complex, because I also play a lot of music from the other side of the country, Røros, where I live, normal fiddle tunes, and that's it's almost always 2 parts, like an A part and a B part with 8 bars, and then you play the A part, you play the B part, and you repeat it, and then you are done. But in the Hardanger fiddle music, it can also be like that. Some tunes are like that, but most of the tunes are not like that. And that it's important to state that the Hardanger fiddle, compared to the violin, is a solo instrument, and the music has developed with that you don't really have to think about playing together with other people. And so it's a little bit hard to explain, but I will show you as well. So a lot of the tunes are built up by small pieces, small motifs that you can put together and variate. So there are, for some tunes, a lot of variations. And when I learn springar, it's usually from another fiddler, or it can be from a recording with a fiddler. But then I learned like the ground form of the tune, and then I can listen to recordings with other fiddlers, and it's always a different approach, almost always a different variations that you can put into the tune and variate. And sometimes it's hard to like tell that if it's clear parts. The tune I'm going to play now has like 3 parts, but each part has like small, especially the first part has a lot of small motifs that I can play for as long as I want, basically, and variate with different variations. And springar has very a distinct dialect in each region, and this is also very interesting in this project when we tried to work with beat analysis, because it's a lot of asymmetric or symmetrical. The springar is in 3 beats, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But in Hallingdal, it's a heavy first beat, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And in Valdres, the neighbor valley, it's more asymmetrical, so it's a short first beat, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And Telemark has a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And Hardanger, west is more flat, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or it can also be 1, 1, 1, 1 when it gets really complex. Yeah, and let's play some music. Yeah, so maybe you understood a little bit about the small motifs and the variations. Yeah, and then we have also hulling, the solo dance. And what is also interesting is that the dance is also built up in the same way, that you have this bank of variations that you can put together and use, both in the couple dances and in the solo dance. So yeah, I think I'll finish with the hulling called Skripalotten. And the hulling tunes are in two different beat signatures. So you have either in 3/8 or in 2/4. So this is in 3/8. Any questions before I play? Yeah?
In the last performance they played,
I think you will get a mic.
In the last performance that you played, how many of the notes would you actually write down to a score, and how many of the notes would you just say it's performance?
Yeah. That is exactly a part of the problem. I think I would write it down quite detailed, but it depends what is the purpose, because some people have written down tunes very detailed, and then it's also a little bit like you are leading the musician away from their own thinking in a way. And some just notate the melody itself without any ornamentation or double strings or double stops. I also think that is a good way to do it, because if you are in the tradition, you know how to play the music anyway. You know where it's common to play a trill, or where you play double strings and double stops. So both ways have their own qualities, I think. I don't know. It's very complex to write everything down.
But if you were passing this tune to another fiddler, how much would you pass of your performance to them?
I think I would teach like a ground form first, and then some variations in the end. Yeah. Okay. Halling. Thank you very much. That's it for my part, I think, so far.
Thank you so much, Olav. So now when we want to appreciate and analyze this fantastic Hardanger fiddle music, we have these different type of analysis available, and we will focus here on this important aspect of transcription of recordings into scores using a computer automated transcription. And so music transcription, we can consider the successive steps for that, starting from the audio recording. So from the waveform, we can already get some kind of more informative representation of the sound by showing already the fundamental frequencies of each note. So here now we start to see the different notes. You have time here, from left to right. You have the different frequencies. And by you doing some kind of sound analysis, spectrogram analysis, and so on, you can start to detect that there are some of these notes here, one after the other. And then the next step is that we want really to detect the actual notes, the beginning and end of each note, the onset, offset of each note, and the pitch of each note. Then we need to associate for each note the actual musical characteristic. So for pitch, we need to understand what is called the pitch spelling. Is it a C, a C sharp, a D flat? So on. Then we also need to integrate those notes into this metrical structure to associate particular notes to beat onsets, others to ace value, and so on. And some of the notes might be related to ornamentations. And then if we speak really about transcription, there are other aspects such as voicing. So the notes form continuous chains of succession of notes. And you have, even for a polyphony, you have this superposition sometimes of different voices. And so we need to segment and to segregate, to detect those different voices. And for instance, for Hardanger fiddle music, we have usually a main melody, which is shown here in yellow, and this drone note that is the other note that is played, that is often the same note, but that can change over time. And so you have this superposition of these two notes. And for instance, for some transcription, often maybe the part from the melody will be shown with will be emphasized on the score, and the drone will be shown with less emphasis. And then, if you need to show exactly the score representation, you need to have also the information about the key signature, time signature. So there is a need for some analysis of tonality and meter. And finally, there is aspect related to performance, tempo, dynamics, phrasing, etc. So in the project of automated transcription, there are all these things to consider. This is very complex. And we will we start with from the beginning, and so it's just the aspect of detecting those notes. So the first step in showing these notes in red. So we have been working a lot on this aspect of how to automatically, from an audio recording, to be able to detect all those notes. So for instance, at the end, you get some kind of MIDI file that you can use to make some kind of automated performance. It's not yet a score, but it could be useful already. And so for detection of notes, I mentioned these different type of approaches, but what works very well is machine learning, meaning that we have some kind of neural network. We provide an audio recording, and we want to get in the as an output this succession of notes detecting from the audio recording. And for our artificial neural network, what is needed is training. So that's what is getting painful in some way, is that you really need to provide to the machine a lot of audio recordings. And for each of those, you should already indicate where are the notes. And so we had that question, which notes are of importance for the score, for the transcription. It's the same here. We had to decide about what are the important notes. And we decided that it was about, we wanted to have a very detailed description. And because it will be very difficult already to hierarchize and select what are the most important notes, we just take all the notes that are played. And the idea is to really provide to the machine for each recording all the notes that are played by the musician. So we created a notation dataset, and so that's where we had the great honor to meet Olav, who accepted to participate to the project, and also 2 other students at the Norwegian Academy of Music, thanks to Lovely. I forgot her name. Uni Lovely. Thanks to her, she was very helpful for getting also the students. So, for instance, Olav recorded 12 tunes, so 18 minutes in total. And for all these 12 tunes, annotated all the notes. So we really thought we were looking at the state of the art of our software to get notes, annotation, but we thought we had to develop our own software to really get very proper detailed annotations. So I show a first demo of what we call Annotemus. And also it will show you the detail of the type of annotation. So oh, no, sorry. So we start with just looking, seeing what I mentioned, the pitch curve. You have all the fundamental harmonics of each note. This is a complete song. And this is a Gudvardsdagen title of the song, played by one of the recording by Olav. So first we can play the music. So here already, here we have all the annotation that was given by Olav. So I just loaded the annotation file. So just to show, now we can play those notes. You can see all these short notes. It's a lot of notes. And we can also play both audio and then you can play more slowly if you want to annotate in detail. So you can see. So I can then show exactly now how we annotate actually the notes. The process to do that is no, did I? Yes, that's correct. So start again from the audio, from just pitch curves. So you can zoom in different ways. Let's zoom further. And so you can draw lines to indicate notes. Of course, a visual representation can be helpful, but we have to be careful because there can be errors. As we we show only the fundamental frequencies. Sometimes there can be mistake, and some notes could be not shown explicitly on the representation. So we can't take for granted the visual representation. So the annotator has to listen to the results, to each note, and make sure that each annotation corresponds exactly to the onset position of each note. So I try to design different ways to really correct those onset offset. So let's see an example here of very short notes. I got very into detail. So we try to make some tools. For instance, you can listen to just a second before or after. So here, for instance, we notice that, in fact, this third note is much longer. It was hidden because it's an octave from the drone, and it's perfect kind of octave, and so it was not seen by them. And then there are ways to correct offset by changing a few milliseconds and listening exactly to what it's. So then you can see with audio feedback if you are exactly on the offset or not. So I feel very sorry about annotators having to do that. And for instance, the drone, one another feature of this software is, you can isolate the particular notes and the sound of the particular note. It's a bit of this artifact, so we have to be careful. And I'm not sure if it was part of. This is maybe part of the. Yeah, no, this is not formal now. And so the idea was that it was better to ask the musicians themselves to annotate because they know what they play. They don't, if it was another person, they will have to guess which note is played. So it was better for that to have the musicians. And also, because one kind of way to get even more data, because we really needed much more data than this. So we try to find some ways to augment the number of tunes available and with the annotation. So we will present in the next presentation more about the ideas of augmentation. But here, for instance, the idea is that we ask the musicians to play 5 variations for each tune, so that then they will annotate one of those annotations. Then variation, but it's not changing notes, but just changing the timing based on some idea of, for instance, trying to change the emotion content of each variation. And so that they will annotate one of the variation, and the computer will align automatically the notes to the other variation, so that it makes it faster, so that we get 5 times more annotation, a bit more faster, because the computer already makes the alignment. But then you still need it to maybe to correct those. So maybe it could be interesting to ask Olav, what was your experience of all this torturous task? So
yes. I think I'll sit here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very interesting project in many ways, and it was also a good job during the pandemic when I didn't have any concerts. But yeah, if we start with the variations, the temperaments, that was quite hard, because for a starter, some tunes I play quite similar each time, but I kind of had to make a selection of tunes that I was able to play exactly the same every time, also in different temperaments. I play the exactly same bowings, and I tried to play the exactly same thrills and ornaments, but it didn't work. It's almost impossible, because when you play like in tempo, when you maybe have time for like 2 thrills, but when you slow it down and play, we had like the normal version was the one that we fed into the computer first, and then I played what we call angry, sad, tender, and happy. And it's quite hard to play a Hallingspringer, like sad and happy and tender, and with the exactly same bowings and exactly same phrases every time. But I did my best, and when I didn't do my best, it was I had to pay for it, because it was so hard. Because then the program would write something totally different than I was playing. But I could demonstrate. So the tune that we heard, Godværsdagen, in a normal. And then you just have to think that now I'm really angry. And just play really hard. And of course, like tender. But still trying to have like all the same double strings, and but it was very interesting, and it was also very interesting to. I learned a lot about my own playing, and some tunes I recorded, like I didn't record the most complex tunes, because it would be really hard to do exactly the same every time. But sometimes. Very easy tunes, when I got them back from the computer, I had my regrets, because there are a lot of details that you don't think about. We saw it in the picture earlier, but like if you just write down the simple melody, it's like. But then when you add, first you add like the double strings. And then I found out that I have a lot of hammer-ons, like forslag, when you don't start directly on the note. So it's like when you start seeing it on the screen, it's like. And then I listened to that. I had to slow it down like times 8 just to get all the details and the perfect timing. And then you get quite crazy after a while because it's like it's so much details, and I was sitting maybe an hour, and then I thought, oh, now I'm maybe done soon. But then I was like 20 seconds into the tune. Oh. Yeah. And yeah, even worse when we started thinking about beats. But
yeah.
Where is the beat exactly? It's really hard to tell. Yeah.
Yes. So,
but all in all, it's been very interesting, and yeah, interesting to learn more about myself, and also about like all the details, and that most of my thrills, every time I thrill with the third finger, when it's in tempo, you don't hear it, like. But when you slow it down, it's like too high. Yeah, I always trill higher than the actual note. So in tempo, it's on. And you listen to that the whole day. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you so much for that. Terribly sorry about this experience. Maybe we should have asked an ethical report before doing that, maybe it was not okay. But thanks to this very hard work, we have a very, very valuable data set, because as you see, a very detailed note annotation of all those tunes. So we don't know that maybe after all, if this task of having 5 different variations, initially the task was aimed at simplifying the work, because the idea was then that you don't have to annotate the 5 times these variations, since the computer will align automatically. But if it then brings more complexity, maybe that was maybe not necessary. But at the same time, that means that we also have something that is of value for music research, for research dealing with music and emotion. So because then we also have this type of data set where we see how to vary music depending on emotion. So that could be useful for that. So then this data set is made available, and also for scientific research. And the software itself, we are making it available. So as I mentioned, so this Annotemus software, this part related to a manual annotation is related to, so we have optimized sound representation, where you can zoom the sound also, visual and audio zoom, slow down, very precise playback capabilities, sonification of the annotation, voice separation. Yes. So that's about this annotation software. Any further question about this? Any question about this before we go to the automated part? Yes.
I have a question. Okay. I have a question about the project, and also for the development of the music itself, and that is the relationship of the dancing to the music. Is there a role for the dancing in the project, and in how you play the music?
yeah, this is a very central, very interesting, important question. So, in fact, we had to reduce the problem, and we are not considering dancing. But at the same time, it's true that some would argue, like Mari Romarheim Haugen, who has been doing research about that, that you can't. Some would say you can't analyze beats, for instance, in this music, without having understanding about the dancing aspect of that music. But we had to make a focus here, so we have not been dealing with dancing. No, but yeah, could be for an extension for the next stage. Dancing is very important, yes.
Thank you so much. Just a question about the ornaments. Because you said it was painful to play the ornaments slowly. And my question is, how do you practice ornaments? Do you start by playing them at full speed and then try to refine it? Or do you start slowly? Speaking from a so-called Western music perspective, where you have a metronome and you're supposed to slowly and then notch up and faster. But I'm not sure whether that is valuable advice for all situations. What do you think about that?
Yeah, just to clarify, I didn't record it slowly, but I just listened to it slowly in playback. But when I think ornaments just comes as a natural part of the tradition usually, and I think you just mostly learn it just by playing tunes, and it after or when you know like 40 different tunes, you know where to put the ornaments, and you also know how the tune should sound in the tradition. So if it's not there, it sounds empty. It's missing something if you don't have that trill or that double string, or it's a lot of different ornaments in the Hardanger fiddle music, but it's nothing well, I guess a lot of people are very clear about it and think a lot about it. I don't really. I just play it, but it's so fascinating to hear old archive recordings. Some fiddlers have a lot of ornaments, and then it's like a totally different tune without them. So sometimes I try to learn ornaments from recordings, where they should be and how they sound. It's a complex situation. Yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yes, but if you focus on the motoric part, how to make your fingers move as fast as you need, how do you do that?
I think the best thing is just to play, and especially when you play Hardanger fiddle, you play a lot for dance, and then you can play for a few hours, and you just learn it, I guess. I haven't really. I don't have the best trills, for example. A lot of other fiddlers have much more better trills and ornaments than I do, I think, but it's there. I don't. Maybe I should practice it more. Yeah, don't make me think about it.
I couldn't help comment on that because I also play the fiddle, and I would explain this exactly in the same way as Olav did. That I've never practiced ornaments in and by themselves, and actually I would say that it wouldn't work to start out slowly and then gradually increase the speed. I don't know that, but my guess is that it's more a kind of an automated thing. So one ornament doesn't really consist of 5 or 7 elements. It's one movement. So and it's a roundabout way of doing things to start doing it slowly, but it's individual, I guess. I guess someone might practice ornaments in a different way. But I just also wanted to comment on the dance, integration of dance, because I would say that dance is implicitly definitely a part of the project, because as Olav indicated, even to know where the first beat is, because it's different, as I will talk about later as well, that the first beat would be the third beat in Telespringer, and you cannot hear that from the music. And so the very meter as such is defined by the cycle of dance movements. So dance, even if we are not like analyzing dance, so that's kind of where the meter is.
I had a more technical question about the visualization you're presenting here. And I wonder if you have some kind of pitch detection, or I guess you remove also parts of the spectrogram in this representation, and or only zoom in on certain frequency ranges. But how did you approach this, and how does that work with the annotations? Because as was commented on, part of our tone was also missing from the visualization. So any short description of the tricks of how you made that visualization?
So it's part of Anders Olofsson model. So Anders Olofsson was working on this project, and we were working together on this establishment of the methodology. And as part of his model, there is it's already part of deep learning aspect, that there is this first from the spectrogram creates what he called pitchograms, which has these fundamental frequencies, just fundamental frequencies without the harmonics. And basically, so you try to find to detect all possible superposition of frequencies over time in various ways. And every time, I'm not sure about the details, but in some way being able to filter out by looking at all these harmonics to get this fundamental, But yes, so it has some artifacts, so it doesn't always work. But of course, the next stage after that is to automate completely everything, so that we get complete. When we do the automation to detect notes, we won't need to have this spectrogram. We start directly from the spectrogram to detect all those notes. Yeah. Okay. So we can now go to this automated part of this transcription. And I'm happy to introduce Lars Monstad, who is a researcher working on the project. So, Lars.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Lars Monstad, and I'm working as a research assistant on the MIRAGE project. And I'm currently responsible for developing the automatic note transcription model together with Olivier and the team. Before we go into our project, we need to talk a bit about existing solutions. We have tools like Celemony Melodyne, Logic Pro FlexPitch, Cubase Pro Vari Audio, and ScoreCloud. So there are other solutions as well. I think Melodyne is the most famous one, which is a VST plugin. And Logic Pro is, I think it's mostly for other tasks than we use it for. And ScoreCloud is probably the one that's closest to our solution. But a lot of those tools have limitations, especially when working with polyphony. And also they are quite challenging to use. Most of them require studio software. So what we are proposed to doing is, like Olivier said, we are using machine learning, which is training on the annotations created by Olav and sound files, and using that as data to automatically create transcriptions. And this is called, or the process we are using is deep learning, which is, as you can see in the picture, it's you have artificial intelligence, and then machine learning is a method of AI, which where the machine learns, and deep learning is a more advanced. So deep learning is basically just a more advanced type of AI. And I think when people are talking about AI these days, they are usually talking about machine learning, which is the most popular type. So what we are doing is that we're converting the audio into spectrogram. So we're actually using a more picture-based AI. So that's how we get the information. And then we use a model that already has some information about the harmonic structure and pitch invariance in the instrument, because it has a recognition of overtones, because the hypothesis is that the overtones and the pitch doesn't change over time. So instead of using a deep learning model that looks general at the picture, we are tweaking the model to fit directly to the Hardanger fiddle. This is a more efficient and more powerful model, and the best thing about it is that it has high accuracy, and it's also very research friendly, because usually deep learning models can be quite power consuming, and you need pretty big computers to run them. But in our case, we are lucky to have a model that's very new and can work on smaller computers. This is very important when we are trying to make this available to other people. Also, high accuracy. We are measuring our model by using F1 scores, because in our dataset we have the audio file, and then we have like the ground truth, the annotation that Olav created, and we always save like a couple of songs in each training. So we measure how good the transcription of the model is based on the ground truth MIDI file. So we can actually measure pretty good how the model is working, and we do that by using F1 scores. And in order to create a bigger data set, we need to use data augmentation, which is basically just taking one song and creating variations of the songs in order to make more songs. You can see the example. It's a bit small image, but it's an image of a lion, and then it's an image of lion with various effects. It's tweaked, it's rotated, and for the machine learning, this helps the model to see other representations of the image, because usually in machine learning you need a huge amount of data set. So in best case we would have 1 million songs in our data set, but we only have like 12 from Olav, so with some variations, so we have to be really creative. The most common task to do is to pitch shift and time stretch. Pitch shift is just transposing, and time stretching is usually slowing down or speeding up without changing the pitch. When we did that to the dataset, we significantly improved the dataset accuracy. But also, since this is musically informed, we are working on a data augmentation method that is using music theory and analysis methods, so we can augment the data in a more musically way, because we have the MIDI file, So we can actually extract data such as harmony using music analysis, and then we can create new songs that sounds like Hardanger fiddle, but it's not Hardanger fiddle. It's kind of AI created, but it's mainly the only purpose is to have more songs to train the model so it gets better to transcribe. So it's a big difference from generative models where you try to create music, where the music itself is the goal. Here is just to get more songs, so you don't have to put any more students to the painful task of annotating. So yeah, harmonic structure. And here are some of our measures. I'm going to try to not explain too technical. The F1 score is the most common score, but you can think of it maybe as a percent, because 1 is like, then it's 100%, then it's basically a good transcription. So the first table here is the song Spretten, and you can see that the Logic Pro Flex Pitch had the worst F1 score. It's a bit unfair to Logic Pro because it didn't. I don't think it had polyphony. So and also it's not really. I think it's more an add-on for Logic and not a method. And also we have Melodyne, which is more like did much better, but Melodyne is also it's not that good score. It's 0.69, and then Score Cloud, which is one of the best transcription softwares, which had a really good score, and then is MuseScribe, which had a bit higher than. Yeah. Sorry, MuseScribe is the name of our application. So and then it's MuseScribe Augmented, which shows how much the augmentation is doing right now, and we're only at the beginning. The scores are a bit unfair because MuseScribe is particularly trained on Hardanger fiddle music, so it makes sense that it would do better, but it's still really good to see that the model is actually working. When you get 94 in F1 score of a transcription, then it's super good to. And I forgot to mention that this transcription, the way I use it, I only like transcribe to MIDI and not to score, because that's entirely another process. So we use mainly MIDI, but when we reach over 90 in F1, you can open it in a music MIDI player, and it sounds like really close. But there's still the problem with it is that if it has a couple of wrong notes, even though it's just some percent wrong, you can actually hear them too much. So it's a bit unfair when we use it. Also, there's a more better table with the average scores for Godværsdagen and Spretten. Godværsdagen was the song that Olav demonstrated. So you can see on the bottom that the augmented part is significantly improved, and I think that the way we're using the model, we have much more to go on, and we're still early in the process, but it's still I'm really happy with the results so far. And also, as I mentioned, there are other transcription tools out there, and there are other models like onsets and frames, which is really good. But they are trained on mainly piano, the Maestro dataset, and there is a lack of dataset for especially this kind of music. So that's also a problem with transcription model, is that the deep learning models are good enough to do super good transcription, but we don't have that many data sets available. So it's not just the model that's the problem, it's having enough data and the quality of the data, like the emotional variations.
Yeah, it was a problem with key. Maybe you just you can click, we can't show, but you can, this one and this one, click.
Yes, so that's the Tinnenmannen from the folk music catalogue, and then we have our version, which is transcribed. So this is a pure transcription. We have done no modifications on it. I was a bit disappointed of the result, but Olivier liked it. But I think that maybe I listened too closely, because you can easily hear that it's the same song, but there are tiny mistakes that yeah, you can. It can still improve a lot, I think. How do I get the one? Yes, the MuseScribe project. It's the name of our project, and we just got funding from the University of Oslo Growth House. We are creating a music transcription application. It's for musician producers and researchers. It's supposed to have an expanding range of music styles, and we have a really good hypothesis on how we're going to do that. But right now we are very limited to Hardanger fiddle music. There's a market potential, and I also work a bit as a music producer, and I know that in that field there are demand for fast transcriptions of songs, because that's I've been doing that manually, and it takes a lot of time, and this is a potential to create AI tools that can help producers or composers focus on the more creative part. But also it's a really good training to transcribe manually. So I'm glad I did it before the tools came, because now I'm actually using our prototype for transcribing songs. So we have developed a minimal viable product, which is a fancy word for prototype or beta or something. So right now it's only running on Mac, but we have plans to make it into a plugin or a smartphone app. But as you probably can understand, that's a significant task. But yeah, we also hope that if we find a creative way to do more data augmentation, it will not only benefit music transcription, but also creating music, generative models. So if you want to create an AI that creates pop songs, you need a large data set of pop songs. And if there are some ways to generate more data from a data set by using augmentation, then that really benefit that process. So yeah, and lastly, I just wanted to talk a bit, mention the music transcription, because the way I'm working on the project, I'm working with, I get the audio file and then I get a MIDI file back, and I use that for comparison. And because as a music producer, it's easier to just work in MIDI, and I see eventually, and I compare the F1 scores in MIDI. But when I try to transcribe it into, or convert it into a score, it was, as Olivier mentioned, it was really much more challenging than I thought, because if the rhythm is a bit off, then the whole score, it looks, it doesn't look great. And there are a lot of, I think there are a lot of research needed in order to convert it into a score, because it has to be representative, symbolic. So thank you for listening. That was my part.
Thank you very much, Lars, for a very nice presentation. Any question? Yeah?
So you said that you use MIDI as a final transcription like result, right? And you also said that you tried putting that into a score. So I assume that at that point you do know where the pulse is, which is very tricky apparently in Hardanger fiddle, to align notes. So what I'm asking is, do these MIDI files have actual like meter indication and pulse alignment, or are they just note onset, note offset all the time without any particular relation to the time signature?
It's only onset and offsets.
Okay.
So I don't have, and I think Olivier is going to talk about that in the next part about Refsum. So luckily I don't have to deal with that right now. So so it's only like onset and offset. And also we have we convert it to MIDI, to CSV, so we only like pitch and where the pitch is and where it stops. So yeah.
Thanks.
I had a question about the F1 scores, which are very high for the augmented version, but it was a bit unclear to me what that score meant. Was that for being able to detect the pitch in those particular tunes, and how are the scores if you compare to the other of Olav's pieces, but also from the rest of the catalogue? Because I guess when you've been training on Olav's pieces, I mean, obviously it would be best be able to detect those, and how would it work for the rest of the collection, or if you try that?
This is only on. The scores are from Olav collection, because from the catalog we don't have the ground truth transcription. So we have to create that first, because in order to create the scores, someone has to create the ground truth. So in our analysis, we only use one or two songs that, in this case it was 2 songs that Olav has recorded, and then we hide that from the model and then it evaluates on that. So, but it's really high scores, but it's possible to get better. I know that there is a model on piano transcription that has 97%, 97 F1 score. So, yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
So this kind of also relates to the F1 scores and the pitches. Could it be like that? I've tried using Melodyne myself to transcribe stuff, and I quickly realized that it tries to shoehorn everything into equal temperament. Is that some other explanation why the other are much worse? Because this seems to be pretty spot on with the pitches, even though it's quite far away from equal temperament in most fiddle music.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on why?
Like most of these already established music software are they don't really go far away from like the Western classical music system. So in a lot of Scandinavian folk music, you have a lot of these blue notes, which are not quite on, like between the notes we have in the Western classical system.
Yeah, that could be a reason. It also can be that they are not machine learning models. I don't know how they are actually, what kind of method they're actually using. And also, it's the problem is that they're generalized. They're for any kind of music. It's for any pitch at all, and they usually also take too much information. So they're bad at filtering out stuff that isn't notes. And the Logic Pro is the opposite. Logic Pro it creates mono anyways, and it turns everything into a mono file. So because that's with Hardanger fiddle, it's almost always polyphonic, which makes it more complex.
Thank you.
So let's thank Lars again. Okay, so after the break, we will go to the next question about the rhythm transcription. Okay, so let's start the session. So I'm very grateful to that Mats Johansson is part of the MIRAGE project. Mats Johansson is professor of musicology at the Department of Traditional Arts and Traditional Music at the University of South Eastern Norway, and has a great expertise in rhythm in Hardanger fiddle music. So, please.
Thank you so much, Olivier, and thank you for including me in this exciting project. I've learned a lot by participating, and still am. Rhythm in Hardanger fiddle, really ambitious title. I'm merely going to scratch the surface, actually, on this topic, and I also would like to say that I would prefer Olav's more practical presentation with actual demonstrations, but perhaps I can contribute with some theoretical perspectives. I will limit the scope to dance music, and there are many local styles, as Olav mentioned, and these are basically in double meter or triple meter, which would be more correctly described as walking rhythm versus running rhythm, since there often is no rhythmic differentiation between beats, as is suggested by the terms triple and double. As Olav already mentioned, the double meter styles can be subdivided into or differentiated into tunes where the beat is subdivided into 2 and where the beat is subdivided into 3. And the Springer styles, which also was talked about by Olav, can be roughly categorized as follows, or as shown here. And in the more detailed discussion that follows, I will mainly focus on the asymmetrical styles. In other words, where the beats within each measure are not only differentiated by accentuation, but also duration. And this, among other things, it will help to highlight the issue how beats of different length are produced. Speaking of beats, I first would like to make some brief comments on how the term beat is used in this context and the different meanings that this implies. On the one hand, it may be more or less synonymous with groove,
In other words, the overall rhythmic feel of a particular style or performance. Or beats may refer to the successively occurring rhythmic events that correspond to the experienced pulse of the music, where we tap our feet or nod our heads, etc. Starting with the former, I first want to mention a recent interview study with Norwegian fiddlers on groove forming processes and strategies. And one thing that was striking in these interviews is that when the fiddlers were asked what constitutes a good groove, the timing of beats in the conventional sense was hardly mentioned. Instead, groove seems better accounted for in terms of an interactive relationship between multiple musical components and the body actions by which they are produced. In the interviews, this included how the melody is crafted and articulated. And there is one quote here, you need to understand the melody to understand the rhythm. It's not the rhythm that carries the melody. Dynamics, meaning a continuously varied distribution of accentual energy between and within notes and phrases. Phrasing, in this context, referring to which and how many notes that are tied together. Ornamentation as a groove-forming device was frequently mentioned, and not least variation within and between these parameters. It was striking how variation in itself was seen as a crucial groove-forming elements. I also want to mention the foot tapping, which is a crucial element of rhythmic performance in this type of music. And it was so interesting to note that how the foot tapping is executed was considered decisive for the musical outcome, which suggests that it's not merely a reflective element of rhythmic performance, but a constitutive element of rhythmic performance. One element or one aspect that really stands out here is the bowing, meaning the varying ways in which notes are shaped. For example, if an attack is sharp or soft, how notes are tied together and how they are accentuated or weighted. And to take out this element would render the whole question of groove meaningless to many fiddlers, I guess. It's also worth noting that bowing is a compound concept in the sense that it comprises all these elements as well as their rhythmic effects. In this way, and in the general absence of music theoretical abstractions, bowing is sort of a stand-in for multiple musical features and their interactions. So varying the bowing within a performance creates a different rhythmic feel, and it tends to affect also the micro-rhythmic architecture of a phrase. So I have asked Olav to do a little demonstration of or where he plays the same phrase first with two different bowing patterns.
It's quite common in most tunes actually, but here's a tune also recorded for the project, Fuglesangen. So the first part.
Thanks. That's a very good example, I think, because you could say that it's more or less the same basic rhythm, but also it gives a different rhythmic character when you change the bowing.
Yeah.
It also affects how beats are detected. With this particular example in mind, I will show you later on. Before that, going back to rhythmic feel or groove, it's worth noting that this is not well accounted for or well represented by some form of repeated percussive pattern or a similar generalized rhythmic template. And more concretely, many of the various variabilities that we will talk about in a while are not necessarily to be seen as being articulated in relation to or on top of the beat or the groove They are rather intrinsic parts of the groove. Correspondingly, when talking about beats as successively occurring rhythmic events, which was the other way of using the term beat, these are not well represented by points in time and corresponding click-like sounds, and this became evident in our beat annotation campaign, where the software allowed for the chosen beat onsets to be sonified by short bursts of sound. And we have one example here. So, long story short, and no matter where the clicks or sonified beat onsets were placed, it sounded a bit wrong. Yeah, Olav nods his head. Yeah. One of the reasons for this is really complex. I could talk all day about this, but one of the reasons for this, I think, is that beats in fiddle music do not consist of onset points, but rather the complete melodic rhythmic gestures of which they are composed. In other words, everything happening from one beat onset to the next. And it's therefore necessary to distinguish between beat onsets and beats. So speaking of detailed transcription, so that's one thing. There are much more, but one aspect of the problem. Another way of putting this is to say that what is happening or what is being played and how is as important as exactly where it starts. And this also aligns with the more holistic concept of beat and the notion that it's better represented by a wave-like or shape-like metaphor than a points-in-time metaphor. Terminology borrowed from Telefskriftet. How the next question is that is relevant to rhythm analysis is how beat onsets are produced or marked within the musical flow, and how these are starting points are detected. And beat onsets are produced either by means of bowing, melodic articulation, or ornamentation, as illustrated in this example. And here's another example, which is taken from the Springar Fuglesången again, recorded by Olav. And perhaps you can play this phrase, if you remember which it is, Olav. Yes, perfect, thanks. So, as you can see here, and perhaps you could hear it as well, some of the beat onsets are marked by means of changing the direction of the bow, while the second and last beats are tied together, so there is no bow attack marking the beat onset, but it's rather the left hand finger movement that marks the beat onset. And generally, beats marked by bow shifts are the easiest to detect, both when it comes to normal listening and when the analysis is aided by various software. As you can see here, the bow shifts are visible as abrupt changes in the frequency spectrum, while melodic onsets within each bow stroke are more difficult to detect. So if you listen to these two examples, which is from the first example Olav played. So you can see where the beat is marked with the bow shift is much sharper contrast in the frequency spectrum. Yes. A related question is how beats of different length are produced. If the beat is asymmetrical, the beats are of different duration. How is this produced, so to speak? And it might be tempting to use tempo metaphors, slow and fast, to account for this, which is, in most cases, I would say, is misleading, because fiddlers do not alternate between slow and fast beats, but rather shape the beats differently, as hopefully illustrated here. And In the Springer material, this is also connected to the characteristic fluctuation in beat duration from one measure to the next, in the sense that shaping the beats differently also affect their duration, which is particularly apparent in the case of complex and ornamented beat motifs, which tend to take longer time to play, to put it very simply. And this also often results in the whole measure stretching out in time. And here is one example. Sorry, I forgot that slide, but okay, here's another example, not played by Olav, but by Per Gudmundsson, who was mentioned here earlier, Swedish fiddler. The first measures of this phrase are more busy, so to speak, with a lot of melodic rhythmic material occupying time for its realization. And again, it's often misleading to refer to this as tempo fluctuation, because doing so prevents us from distinguishing this phenomenon from actual tempo fluctuations, where the fiddler actually slows down and then speeds up. So if we use tempo for this, then we have no term left to actually address actual tempo fluctuations, where the overall density of rhythmic events decreases or increases. So this is a bit nerdy, but that it's one of the challenges when trying to transcribe or automatically transcribe this music when the measures are not of the same duration. Yeah. Well, how complex is Hardanger fiddle music? It may seem overly complex and difficult to grasp in one sense. My response to this is that if you spend a few nights at a dance party and just follow the flow people who are interacting with the music and together, you will find nothing complex at all about this music. I guess 2 or 3 nights will do the trick. It's only when we attempt to force the music into categories, models, concepts, abstractions, etc., that belong to another domain of musical knowing that the music appears to be complex. Bold statement, perhaps, but I stand by it. And all this said, and to state the obvious, many of these features present some challenges to trying to analyze this music in a conventional musicological sense, and also to automate the transcription, of course. So what I'm aiming to do in the last part of the presentation is to address some of these particular challenges. And the first, which in a way, this is a list of the challenges, and I will address each of them briefly. And the first of these was already addressed earlier by Olav, and it concerns metrical ambiguity or uncertainty. That is, even if it's possible to identify a succession of played beats, it remains to determine how the beats are metrically organized. Where does the measure start? Where is the one? Where is the downbeat? And the main challenge in this regard stems from the fact that the start of the metric cycle and the subsequent accentuation pattern, whatever it is, if it's heavy, light, or whatever, it is often not evident from how the music sounds or how it's structured. Instead, and as I mentioned earlier regarding the significance of dance, the meter is determined by the cycle of dance movements, which is different between different styles. For instance, as I mentioned earlier as well, in the so-called telespringer, the down movement of the dancer's center of gravity, corresponding to the downbeat, occurs on the long beat, while in the Hallingspringer, the downbeat is located on the short beat. This means that one and the same tune can be heard as having the first beat on different locations. The first beat in Hallingspringer is the third beat in telespringer. And the fiddler's foot tapping represent this more general sense of meter. And I have asked Ola to demonstrate how the same tune can be played as Hallingspringer and as telespringer.
Yeah, you asked me. Okay, so Hallingspringer, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
Very good, thanks. And it actually was much better than I thought it would be, because I was completely fooled. I heard totally telespringer in the last example and totally Hallingspringer. But
That's good.
if we take out the context, if we take out that you actually present that now I'm going to play telespringer, if we take out the foot tapping, if we take out the overall rhythmic consensus on the dance floor and just listen to the sound, it's often impossible to know where the one is. This is perhaps the most severe challenge to automated analysis, because this is simply a cultural coding of the rhythm rather than what's in the music. So it's but interesting. The next category concerns the sometimes ambiguous relationship between melodic rhythmic structure and metrical structure. And because how the music is phrased, how it's timed, how it's accentuated, etc., it's not always obvious how notes are grouped together, and which in turn may imply that it's unclear which note that belongs to which beat. And not necessarily the best example, and people might actually agree more than I'm portraying here, but the example illustrates two possible interpretations of neighboring beats within a phrase. And the audio features 3 successive versions and slightly different versions of the phrase. And we will focus on the second. And I would say that in the first version, it's clearly the rhythmic interpretation to the left. In the third, it's clearly the interpretation to the right, while the second version might possibly, by someone, not Olav, be heard as the one to the right. So it's about whether it's the second beat is a triplet or whether it's split up like that. When I said that the last version, I would say it's not a triplet, and this also illustrates that context is important because it suggests alternatives, interpretative alternatives, and possibly categorical differences. And another factor is, of course, how melodic rhythmic figures are performed on a detail level, and in this case, it boils down to timing. It boils down to timing, because while the remaining elements are closely similar, the timing of the triplet, in inverted commas, in the first version it's completely symmetrical triplet, while in the second version the second note of the triplet is stretched out, and hypothetically when it's stretched out enough there is a categorical switch where it's no longer heard as a triplet but split up into 2 beats. And exactly where that point occurs, it's contextually determined. It's determined by your background. It's determined by what's common in this case in telespringer, what type of rhythmic groupings are common in this style of playing, etc., etc. Another example where we agreed or disagreed. I think in both of these there was some disagreement among annotators. It could be argued by someone that interpretations A are more logical from the point of view of rhythmic phrasing and melodic grouping, while interpretations B are more logical when considering typical rhythmic groupings in Hallingspringer again. And the overall short-long average beat ratio. Have a listen to this. Which one do you go for, Olav? The last one.
yeah. The first one, I guess.
Yeah, but it's tricky. It's tricky because when we choose the interpretation to the left, the first beat becomes too long, in a way, too long. If we choose the interpretation to the right, the first beat becomes too short. So somewhere in the middle, perhaps, would be.
Yeah, that would probably be correct. But yeah, I think the first one is closer in my head.
Yeah, so these are perhaps better examples than I feared. One thing with timing is that it's not reliable criterion, since we should expect fluctuations in beat duration. We cannot deduce from the duration of the beat that it should be the one or the other alternative. So that's part of the complexity as well. And as suggested by our conversation here, it also remains a possibility that an ambiguous or undetermined rhythmic interpretation is actually an option. That it's not that or that, it's just ambiguous, and it's supposed to be ambiguous. It's part of the rhythmic aesthetic. Would you agree? That
yeah,
kind of
absolutely. And yeah, like we talked about as well, that it's also something that people just have in the culture that they are used to. They are used to thinking and dancing in that beat, so they have that rhythm in their body. And I can also play another rhythm on top of it, and they still dance the thing they are used to.
Yeah, that's definitely an important part of context as well. We also need to talk about syncopation, because one of the big questions is how to determine when a particular melodic onset is like representing the beat onset and where it represents a syncopation against the beat onset, which might be a bit tricky. We will start with true, some examples of true syncopations, which either may be occasional off-beat articulations, starting a note slightly before you perceive the beats to start, or in the form of more persistent parallel rhythmic streams. For example, in the Ganger material, there are a lot of instances of 2 against 3 rhythm, where the bowing represents kind of a 2 + 2 + 2 rhythm, while the foot tapping and the dance movements is in 3 + 3. So this is an example from Olav's recordings, which perhaps you could play this phrase as well, where you have the 2 against 3 polyrhythm. So in this case, I wouldn't say that it's ambiguous, because there is definitely a correct interpretation. The 3 + 3 version is the correct metric interpretation, because it corresponds to the dance movements and the foot stomping. But you might be fooled to think that this is like that's like in 3/4 or something, which is the wrong interpretation, I would say. So it's a polyrhythmic and a true syncopation. So could we also say that the beat duration variations in springar also are syncopations? And I would say that in most cases, I would say that they are not syncopations. And some context to this statement is that syncopation suggests that a rhythmic tension against the rhythmic reference. And if we agree on that, we can consider that the fluctuations in beat duration in springar playing are often so invisible, so to speak. They are so seamlessly embedded into the flow of melodic rhythmic events that you don't pick them up. You don't hear them as variations. They are simply the rhythm. So the variations in beat duration are not expressive deviations from some actual rhythm. They are the rhythm. And one manifestation of this is that melodic motifs typically have their own timing, as illustrated here. Another recording from Olav's catalogue. And what we see here is that the beat timing values of neighboring measures are very different. But the beat timing profile of the two-measure motif as a whole is consistent. So the phrase as a whole is consistently timed, but the first beat of the first measure is much shorter than the first beat of the second measure. Without the clicks this time. So I'm returning to this figure, but one important implication is that rhythmic temporal reference structures are emergent and context-specific. So what is heard as syncopation cannot be deduced from comparing what is played with a metronome or something. It's contingent on the particular melodic rhythmic context where it occurs. So that's an interesting and tricky aspect of this. For instance, I would say that in this example, the first beat of the second measure is in a way too long for Hallingspringer, too long in inverted commas. But to make this short would likely disrupt the rhythmic flow of the phrase and potentially make it sound syncopated. I've actually tried to do this digitally, but I won't play it because it sounds. I would destroy your recordings, Olav. But do you see what I mean? That let's say that the long second beat of the long first beat of the second measure belongs to this phrase rhythmically. If you change that to a very short first beat, it will almost sound syncopated against what's the natural rhythmic reference in this context. So the issue of syncopation is very tricky, I would say, here. Finally, just a few words on micro-level ambiguities, because it's not always obvious where a beat onset actually occurs. Or what would you say, Olav?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah, it's very hard, actually.
Here are 3 examples from one of the tunes that Olav recorded, featuring 3 different ways in which ornamentation may be involved in and around the beat onset. And in many instances, it's about whether grace notes and ornaments are to be considered anticipatory or as the beat onset. And in the beat annotation campaign, I think that we mostly agreed that in most cases, the ornamental onset is the beat onset, but there are many exceptions to this. And for instance, when played slowly, sorry, Olav, but in the last beat here, I think that the first ornamental note sounds like a pickup note. So let's see if you agree. Da-ya. So when played slowly, it almost sounds like a pickup to the beat, and confusing. So, but it's ambiguous. Another more general issue is like the overlapping relationship between structural and ornamental levels. There was a question earlier here about how much to transcribe, what's essential, what's decorative, etc. And many fiddle players that I've talked to agree on that ornamentation is so intrinsic to the rhythmic structure that it cannot be taken out, and what's left is like the structure, it's intermingled. And also in terms of duration, which might create some problems, because here is one example where the grace note occupies as much as 44% of the duration of the whole note, and 184 milliseconds that significantly overlaps with the typical duration of structural units. Just a brief listen to that one. So the ornamental note is actually much longer than many structural notes in the recording. So how to determine which belongs to which? The last example here is definitely, I would note this as triplets. But the short notes here are extremely short. They are as short as 70 milliseconds. Oh, sorry. It didn't work. Sorry. This one. I wouldn't notate these as trills, but rather as melodic notes.
Yeah, it's melody.
It's melody.
Yeah.
But these melody notes are much shorter than some of the ornamental notes. So this overlap creates some challenges, I would say, Olivier. So that's more or less it, I guess. That again, I would just reiterate the idea that some of these ambiguities and uncertainties are sort of part of the rhythmic aesthetic of this music. That it's almost supposed to be a bit unclear in some moments. So that's part of what gives also rhythmic life to the music. So. But again, present some interesting challenges to transcription, even in manual analysis and transcription, of course, but also automated transcription. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and we can rather discuss in relation to the beat annotation process. Yeah. Mm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mats. So as part of your presentation, you mentioned this annotation campaign, beat annotation campaign that we carried out. So, yes. So because we wanted to have a clear understanding of how different musicians will agree on the position of those beats on sets, and also possibly to use this kind of annotation for evaluation of different models, so as a reference point for training computational models. So we wanted to get this systematic collection of beat annotation. So basically we asked students or musicians to indicate the location of the location of the beats. So first of all, in state-of-the-art research for beat annotation, one possible way to ask people to annotate beat is to tap on the music. But obviously, in the case of Hardanger fiddle music, as we discussed, it's very elastic way as the position of the beats, and so the idea is, as you really described in your presentation, Mats, is that it made more sense to ask annotators to associate particular notes to the location of the beat onset. So that's what we did we implemented into Annotemus this possibility of indicating this beat location on particular notes. So so we start from this sequence. Just a note that it's very interesting with this sound system. We can hear the foot tapping. I never heard it before. So in all the experiments we did, we didn't hear that. So it helps for the annotation, of course, if you have this sound. It's very low frequency. So here is how to annotate in our software. So you select particular notes. So first for let's say the first bar, you indicate actually the location bar number 1, and by default it's a beat number 1. Then you select the other note, the next note for related to the beat of the second bar, beat, the onset of the second beat, and it will automatically indicate. So maybe don't go too fast here. But so what you can see here, this is the location of the beat onset for the first beat of the first bar, then bar number 1, beat number 2 out of 3. So it's just to indicate there are 3 beats in bar 1, just by default. Then here is the beat number 3 for bar 1, and so on. So basically, then, so that's where you can also then listen to this kind of strange sounding sonification of the beat onset that might raise issues for music experts, expert of that style, to have this so clear location of beat onset. But that's helped a lot for a non-expert to understand better where are the location of the beats. So then let's see if we, once we have annotated the whole piece. So this is Olaf who annotated, you annotated yourself the notation, the location of the beats. 1, 2. Sometimes some offsets are not indicated. If there are silent beats, it's not indicated. And yeah, so then we can also compare annotation from different annotators. And so we compare Olaf and Matt's annotation of that same piece. So we can load the two and have a kind of diff representation. And you see in blue the location, blue and green, when you don't agree. And that's exactly the example you mentioned before. There. I can zoom in.
Yeah, that's exactly the example that I used.
And so, for this annotation campaign, we use these 12 tunes played by Olaf. So Olaf annotated the beats, and then we asked 3 additional experts, so Mats and 2 students, Matthias Sevin and Kuro Nesham. And so then each of those 3 additional annotators, they were asked to compare then their beat annotation with Olaf's annotation using this representation I showed. And so that they could really reflect for each difference if there is any mistake or if really there is a divergence. So that we are sure at the end that we have annotations where we have clearly set divergence between annotators. And so we are preparing an article about that, and we will release also this data set soon. And from this data set, you have a lot of very interesting information for rhythm analysis. Here it's a bit complex, but you have the duration of each bar for each song, so each color is a different tune, and you have the successive bar. So the first bar usually is longer. The tempo is relatively constant for all the tunes, and so yeah, it's just that we can see that some bars are much longer than others. Then it's very interesting to have this statistical description of the asymmetry of the meter. And so you have the 3 beats and duration in, do I have the legend? In milliseconds? No. What was that? Could it be? It can't be milliseconds.
Yeah, that has to be milliseconds.
Ah, yeah, millisecond, because that is 0.4. Yeah. So in milliseconds of the 3 different beats, So you see the asymmetry and longer third beat. You can see a histogram of the duration of, so this time it's not in milliseconds, but it's in percentage of the whole bar. For the first beat, the duration of the first beat as a percentage, the second beat and the third beat. So just to see some kind of multi-modality, so that there are some, for instance, here for the first beat at 25% and that's 35% and so on. But of course, these are kind of general statistics where we blur everything. Could be interesting to see for one given piece of music. So this is the good Varstagen. So maybe I should explain a bit. You have the successive bar. Each column is a bar, so this is the first bar. And you have the duration. This is the first beat, the duration, relative duration of the first beat, second beat, and third beat for the first bar. So that the third beat is longer. That's the second bar. It's the first beat of the second bar that is longer. I can't mirror here. I can't see. Where is it? If I could see my screen, that could help. Is it so? Yeah. So the second, I couldn't see here. The second, the first beat of the second bar is quite particularly longer. So third beat of the first bar and first beat of the second bar. And it's the same for bar 3 and 4, just because it's the same motif that is repeated. So we can see the interconnection between asymmetry and motifs. So if I play again, oops. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And
I just want to mention that was exactly the example that I showed on the last slide with the graph.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we have collected annotation of music, and Matt have indicating all those challenges related to beats, metrical analysis for Hardanger fiddle music. So we can see that it is extremely challenging to be able to detect, for instance, just detect beats. It's already not a question because it's already a kind of ambiguity by itself. But can we try to have an estimation of the beat onset on this Hardanger fiddle music? That's what we are trying to do as part of the project as well. First, about state of the art. There are some famous software for beat tracking that works very well for a lot of type of music, the MADMOM software. And I just couldn't resist trying to play, to see the result and to play the results for this music. So, first I will play with the beats annotated by Olav, so that we get an idea of what is the actual beat position. So let's listen now to the other beat estimation from MADMOM. And because it's this kind of software presumes that the beat is quite regular, so this will be a bit regular also. It's a way a bit how non-expert like me before being dwelling into this music, couldn't perceive the music. It works well in a way. Very syncopated. Okay. So now we have to face this challenge, and it's of course difficult. So again, we were, for instance, for note detection, we were using method based on machine learning, where you train a model, where you give to the model a lot of examples of audio recordings and their beat annotation. The problem is that we can't use that directly here because we will need to get a lot of annotation of Hardanger fiddle music to be able to have a model that we start to train on that to be able to learn and to predict correct location of beats. And also, one issue with the deep learning models is that you will have difficulties to understand what's happening in the model. So it's a bit of a black box. So we will not be able to see why there are these decisions and to kind of solve the way to try to model. We are interested to understand about the role of the different heuristics, as Mats has indicated, what are the part of timing, of bowing, and so on. So it would be very interesting to know by ourselves how we could explain those different interactions. So that's why what we are trying to do here, instead of making this kind of machine learning model, is to create, it's the other way of doing artificial intelligence, by building a set of explicit rules based on principles related to cognitive principles, musicology, music expertise. So, of course, first, there are a lot of challenges for that. And first of all, we need to make something. We can't build a lot of rules. For instance, when we discuss about that type of music, as Mats has indicated, we can see a lot of heuristics, a lot of possible ways of getting those beats position. But to implement all those into a model is very challenging. And one way that seems to be kind of possible way is to start with very simple model, start from scratch, and progressively building more and more rules so that we can see what is working, what is not working. So starting with, what is a very kind of a debatable and shows the tension that we have here between computational modeling and musicology, cognitive understanding of the music, is that why we see the complexity of Hardanger fiddle music. For computational modeling, we will have to start very humble in a humble way by looking at simple heuristics and look at how far we can go with simple heuristics. But it seems that what I will show in this model that I'm building right now is that I'm just taking consideration timing of notes and how far we can get to understanding of beats just by looking at the timing. So it's kind of conflictual to what you said about taking into consideration motifs and so on, and bowing. In a way, I take into consideration some aspect of bowing, we will see. But how far we can go with that, and then all the problems that can arise with this model, we can see where exactly we need to have cultural knowledge or aspect related to culture that will enter into that, so that enable to maybe better see the the constraint or the difference between this cognitive modeling and the culture-based modeling. So, because it's a work in progress and because it's I found it more entertaining to do this way, I will explain with an example. So here is, I think it's a Vrengja piece played by Olav. Maybe I will go fast. So one aspect is, first we will not go into detail too much into micro-level aspects that you show at the end of representation. So when we have notes that are very close together, we will just consider this as one location of bits without going into detail to see which of these two notes are the actual bit onsets. Also, when you have a succession of very short notes here, this is considered as we just put the bit onset on the first of those short notes, but this needs to be made more refined afterwards for a better model. So now the interest in this example is going right into the problem that you mentioned, is when we have this succession of notes here, which of these three here is which of these 1, 2, 3, these three there is a bit onset. So we can try, for instance, the first one could be the bit onset. Then if this is the case, the idea is to try to propagate this bit onset detection by trying to constrain to have duration of bits that are approximately similar, but accepting asymmetry between successive bits, and also bar duration should be relatively similar. So in this case, we might have a bit onset here. Here is just we also model the sub-bit per session. So here we say, okay, in this case, this is a kind of sub-bit in between this bit and this bit, and but the problem is if we use this solution, we start to have issue of relocation of the subsequent bit here, and so on, and it's very fast. So this hypothesis to use this bit onset here will lead to an unrealistic bit sequence. So now that the idea is that we try different bit onset hypotheses at the same time in parallel, and some will work and some won't work. Maybe that's a kind of way we perceive rhythm, is that we might have different oscillation, different ways to detect those bits for a given piece of music, and some will work and we will continue tracking those, and some will not be realistic and we will just stop tracking those. So then if we use this bit onset here, we choose this bit onset here, this one will work. This is another possible position for this bit onset. Yeah, maybe I will not go too much in detail, but this one, for instance, is problematic because if you have a bit onset here, this one is more difficult to explain. Yes. So, for instance, what did I do? In this case, that we have selected this as a bit onset and this as a bit onset, because we also track the subbits, we see the regularity of subbits. So if there is a regularity within the subbits, there is a need to continue this regularity. Also this. I can show maybe in the next example. So for instance, yeah, I won't go into too much detail about all this, but the one that I wanted to show, so this is, for instance, the beat tracks, beat onset that will sequence of beat onset that works and that correspond to the annotation. Let me see if I find an example. There, I can play maybe. Yeah. So now, in this case, if we start inferring by hypothesis that the beat onset is here, yes, here. The problem is that because you have a sequence of very similar duration, you have to keep the same logic. So because you had beats every 2 sub-beats, you have to continue this on and on. And the problem is that in this case, you get a beat sequence that is much too fast. Just for that reason, you can't accept this beat sequence. So instead, if we choose to decompose that beat into 3 and continue like that, we can track further and get a beat onset location that correspond actually to the beat annotation that was given by the musicians. So just to summarize or to give a more general idea about that is to try to build some kind of cognitive and musically inspired model, progressively inferring beats while scanning the music sequence chronologically. We allow multiple hypothetical beat sequence in parallel with constraints, successive beat duration not too irregular, also for the bar duration, tracking also the sub-beat level. So taking into account, so I didn't mention, but there were some points we could see in the note annotation, the bow attack. So, this is something we don't have time to talk about now, but actually because of those note annotation, it can be seen, the bow attack in some ways. So we can take this into consideration for the beat tracking. And for what we are doing now, it's more like a long-term project and kind of one big hypothesis of the whole research is to progressively build representation of the music and to use that as a high-level information that can be used as a reference to help improving, continuing the analysis for the lower analysis. So for instance here, we can then also detect motifs, phrase, and use this as a way to guide the analysis. So for instance, if we have a whole phrase, then the next repetition of that phrase, we can use that repetition to help detecting the beats, since we already know the beats of the first phrase. It's the same, for instance, for beat note annotation. We notice that sometimes detecting notes is problematic, but if we construct at the same time a high-level description of the music in terms of phrase, harmonic aspect, modal aspect, so we have expectations that can be used to correct any error in the transcription. So that was a claim, scientific claim for the project, what kind of guidance, but that we will use for later research. And so the idea is to start with very low-level aspects of timing and progressively infer those more cultural knowledge, especially for instance concerning the downbeats and so on. Yeah, I will not go into detail about this. So that's about for this current attempt of automated beat tracking. Any question about that? Yes, Alexander. Yes, there is a question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. I have a question. Both you and Mats also talked about the music here as a starting point for the analysis. I just wonder about the music.
What did you say about
the music? You're talking about the music, but I just wonder about what is the music, and particularly with the foot stamping, which to me seems to be an integral part of the performance. But as you said, you're not really taking that into account also when you're trying to do the analysis. Although we actually heard it here with the low frequency sound, but wouldn't it be also an idea if you actually recorded the foot stamping and used? I mean, that's a very clear signal that you have there to start with. So that's for the audio part. But of course, since I'm into analyzing the body as well myself, of course also, I mean, you could also, if you had a video recording of this, you would also be able to detect both the foot stamping and also the bowing very easily from a video recording. So I just think about whether that could be used as an additional augmentation of the analysis and kind of the transcription.
Yes, definitely. And we were also collaborating with Marie Romarheim Haugen about that. She has collected these different modalities of foot stamping and gesture, body gestures. And the thing is that we will need a lot of data to be able to guide. That could be useful if we wanted, for instance, to collect a new annotation of beat onsets. Directly is maybe the most natural way to just record beat stomping. Definitely. It's just that, for instance, we don't have this data necessary for all those recordings. And the idea is to, for those recordings where maybe we don't know the proportion of recordings who do have beats stomping that could be detected and those who don't, which don't. But it's also the question of if with the computation model we are able to detect the beat without the help of the beat stomping, it's maybe kind of a positive way to have a system that could be used, or that understands something about the music, since it doesn't require some input from the musician. But yeah, it's a very important aspect.
Thanks. Just want to mention, I don't have the solution for this, obviously, and I think your starting point is promising. Sort of a bottom-up approach, tracking events as they occur and building stuff compared to like conventional beat tracking, where you have a grid where things are supposed to fit, so to speak, top down, which would never work here. But I wanted to mention, because you showed some statistics or representations of statistics, where you show the variability of the first beat and measure duration, etc., which is very interesting. It might give the impression that the variation is more or less random, or you have this tolerance where things can fluctuate because it's no big deal. Like the first beat can be long, it can be short, but and I'm not suggesting this was your intention, but it can be read like that. And my response to that is that almost nothing of this is random. It's musically logical down to almost the millisecond level, because if it weren't, how is it that longer phrases in this music typically is timed precisely the same way when repeated? How is it that motifs stretching over 4 measures have, or in some cases have exactly the same timing pattern if things just fluctuate randomly? It doesn't make sense. And again, I'm not suggesting that you indicate that, but it's a key here, because if it's not random, it is in a way systematic, or I'm hesitating to call it rule-based, but there are some principles here that, being advanced enough, a machine should also be able to learn at least some of these principles. Like when you build things from the bottom up, when does a beat stop and the next start? If you see what I mean. And when you are done with 3 beats, it's the next measure. It's very complicated, but it's not. And starting out with timing is a very good idea, because I think there are patterns there that could tell us a lot, or you can get quite far. If you add melodic structure, if you add bowing figures, if you add all these other things that we have been talking about, I think that it might actually be possible to a far greater extent that one would expect from such a process or project. So again, I would just want to stress that what seems to be random or just fluctuating is not random.
Thank you. I would. Can you hear me? I would add to that also the physiological side, because as you mentioned, the rule-based, or that's maybe not a good word, but based on evidence, data of different kinds, that you have the physiological constraints at work in music making. That's why I asked about ornaments. And that's why Mats has been so kind as to help me, together with other musicians, terabytes of ornaments, finger moving, that we still need to process. But the point is that since you talk about categories and categorical thresholds, I think there are some quite clear physiological principles that we can get information out of, which could help us to kind of understand why we have certain constellations that are, as Mats mentioned, are actually quite repeatable, quite stable. And in particular, that goes for ornaments. Mats has this series of ornaments, and they're pretty much exactly similar across many repetitions. So there is something ingrained in our body. Embodied cognition has become a hype nowadays, but the truth of it is that you have these constraints which we cannot escape from, and the more professional you are, maybe the more constraints you have actually to deal with.
That could be an interesting question to see how much the model can work with just low-level aspect of timing, then how much we need to have aspect related to culture, but maybe also about embodiments. So, that's something that could be considered, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is very, very interesting, and I think also it's a good solution starting bottom up with the onset. But then the next question is whether the onsets, what's the relationship between the beat onsets and the experience of where the beat is? Because also, of course, here the onsets are sometimes very, very vague, and it could be that the experience of the beat is much later, probably always much later in the sound, and extended and more like I felt, feel of gravity than actually a point in time. So, but that's I guess a next challenge.
Yes, in a way, also one reason we were focusing on locating beat onset to particular notes is because we were interested in the transcription itself. But then it could be very interesting to also study about the felt beat location, provided that we get, for instance, data, behavioral data about that, then it can be interesting to get some statistical description about that in the future. Yeah. Okay. So there was the last part. I can go quickly. So about music analysis, visualization, and browsing into the music catalog. So again, it was some aspect of the MIRAGE project. So first, about the music analysis, now that once we get the direct analysis, so just from the automated transcription, we get a lot of data that could be very useful for musicological purposes. detailed description of corpus along different genres, statistics of, could also statistics of pitch intonation, of timing, beat structure, and so on. Can attempt automated characterization of music styles, dance type, region, and so on. Model analysis. And so what I'm particularly interested in working on then automated detection of phrase, of motifs, of structure. And I would be curious to see if there is a way also to try to model some aspect of the principle of the construction of this type of music, and also ornamentation to try to see if we can exhibit some rules related to the use of ornamentation based on the structure of in the music. And also revealing correspondences within the corpus to see thematic correspondences, repetition of themes within pieces and across different genres. Then very quickly, so this is work in future work, so of course we couldn't work on those aspects already now. So that's what I show. For the public, we are working on visualization aspects, and just I was thinking as type of visualization, we tried this kind of sonification of beats, so thinking about beats analysis, and we saw that this sonification of very precise beats onset can sound a bit strange for experts, but at the same time could be, I find it very, I don't know about you, but as a non-expert, when I hear that, it reveals a lot about that music. I can finally understand about the rhythm in the music. I was thinking of other ways to visualize. So, for instance, a very simple way, but just to give an idea of that visualization can open ears. What about just visualizing the beats like this? This is not that, but after once I play. So trying progressively to build more and more refined type of visualization that make the music experience immersive for the public, to try to make them understand better about the music. This is very simple, but just a kind of starting point. Okay. And if we look at, for instance, this piece of music, so that was this. So, of course, this kind of representation is also useful to show that with a synchronization of this visualization to the music. But still, this kind of representation of notes is a bit abstract. We don't really feel the rhythm with this type of representation. So how to try to design something where you have both this type of pitch curve, but also where we could really see the characterization of those beats. First, something of interest is also the structure of the whole piece of music, for instance, of this conga. And we could try to visualize this. So I was inspired by the other experiment we did with Bach fugue that I showed this morning, where we tried to show the fugue, the different repetition of the themes using some kind of representation that is called a paradigmatic analysis. And we can do the same type of representation for this type of music, where we... Yep, can I stop that? I can't. It's a bit... So, like the first part, at the second part of the phrase, and then in the second part of the tune, you have another type of phrase that is repeated. This. But where the ending is a bit similar, so maybe tell me if I'm wrong with the analysis. It's my way of understanding how this is constructed. So this kind of paradigmatic analysis is just a way of aligning melodies where in columns you have similar aspects. So here the second part on the right is the same kind of closure of each phrase. So it's shown on the same location on the right. And then you have another, at the end, another phrase that is also with the same closure. It's very interesting to see that this type of paradigmatic analysis was designed from anthropology, from Lévi-Strauss, by Nicolas Ruvet, who for analyzing Geisler-Lied from the 14th century, where actually, when you see that first analysis that he proposed, it was exactly the same thing where we could see the closure, the same closing part for in the music, and some different type of way of having repetitions for the first part of the music. So it was just a mention of how to make visible the structure of the music, but basically to go back to one idea is to try to combine this idea of showing this pitch representation and articulating with a better representation of beat structure. And so it seems that it could be related to some kind of gesture, trying to design some kind of gesture that really shows a characteristic of each part of the music. So that would be related a bit to the Sound Tracer project. To finish, also we are working on a way to browse into a music catalog, how to get an informative bird view of the whole catalog, how to have visual cue for each tune, for the corpus, for the style, and for each tune automatically indicating the particular characteristic compared to the tune of the same style, and linking to other tunes with similar characteristics. Yes, so that was about the presentation of today, and this is you can get more information about the project with the MIRAGE website. So thank you for your attendance. So any question related to the last part? So now we have still less than a year to try to go on those analysis and visualization parts, and hope to show some of it next year. So, yeah, thank you.